All right, tonight we're beginning in chapter 4 and in verse 14. And now then we're down to the point where it's going to be talking about Jesus, our high priest. Now, who was the high priest in the Old Covenant? Who was the first high priest? We'll put it that way. All of his descendants followed out of there. Who was number one? Who was first? Aaron, right. So it's called the Aaronic priesthood after Aaron. So Aaron was the first. So over there in the Old Covenant, you have the Aaronic priesthood. But now under the New Covenant, we have the high priesthood of Jesus Christ. And so that is what we're going to be talking about tonight. Now so far, we have seen the superiority of Christ. In chapter 1, he is deity, and he is above all things. He has made all things, he is above all things. And then in verse 5, he is deity, and therefore he is above all angels. Angels are great, but Jesus is above them. He is also the king. Now he's not only the king, but he is the king of all kings. He has been exalted above all of the kings. And then in chapter 3, he is a son of God and above Moses, who was a servant of God. So Moses was faithful, Moses was great, Moses was wonderful. We can't brag about Moses enough, but Moses was a servant, and Jesus Christ is a son. So he's greater than Moses. Then in the first 13 verses of chapter 4, you can just put them down there, Alec, it'll be fine. In the first 13 verses there, Jesus gives us a rest that is greater than Joshua's rest. Now, what do we mean by Joshua's rest? What was the rest that Joshua gave the children of Israel? It was Canaan, the land of Canaan. Took them into the land of Canaan, and that was their rest. He had brought them out of Egypt, took them through the 40 years in the wilderness, took them over into Canaan, and so they had that rest in a land flowing with milk and honey. But Jesus is giving us a greater rest. What is his rest? Heaven itself. So as we now are going through this world, when we pass through, then the rest we will have is heaven itself. So the whole point is Jesus is greater. Now then, as we're starting in chapter 4, verse 14 tonight, his priesthood is greater than Aaron's. And as you come to the conclusion then, therefore, don't drift back. Now we need to keep this in front of our mind every time we open the book of Hebrews. When we look at the argument that he is giving, he gives one argument after another argument after another argument all the way through. And every argument is given for one purpose. And that one purpose is for the word, what is the magic word in Hebrews that we talked about? Better. Better. That is, Jesus and everything he has is better than anything that you find under the old law. And so, therefore, since Christ is better, then don't drift back. Don't drift back into that Judaism that these people were now beginning to start drifting into. So it was to keep them faithful, energetic, working for the Lord. Now, as we start in tonight then, we're going to see here in verse 14, having then a great high priest who hath passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. So now, as we look at this, here we have a priest that is over here under the Old Covenant. And you saw a lot of this on Sunday morning. Here you have the priest under the Old Covenant. And what was his name? What was the first name? First priest? Aaron. Okay, so there you have him. Now, when anybody under the Old Covenant wanted to go to God and offer a gift to God, they had to go through the priesthood. They could not circumvent it. You had to go through that priesthood. Now, over here today, we now are here in the church, and now we have a priest. And that is that Jesus left heaven. He came down here to become a man. And that's important. And we've studied about that. And as he became a man then, was born a little baby, became a man, the very purpose of that was so he could die on the cross. He would have a human body, he could die for us, and he could pay the price. But now what was the other reason? There's two reasons. Now, What's the other reason that he became a human being? So he could function as a high priest. And so when Jesus died on the cross, he really also became our high priest. Now he ascended up into heaven, and there is where he is today at the right hand of God. Now there's where our high priest is. Now if we want to know what our high priest does, since Jesus is in heaven and we can't see him, then we have to go to the Old Covenant, look at the priesthood under the Old Covenant. In fact, what was the Old Covenant given for? What was all of those examples given for? Why did God give us all of the examples under the Old Covenant? It was to give us a physical view of what's going to happen in the spiritual realm. So he gave them a physical high priest. He told the physical nation of Israel, here's what you must do when you want to offer a physical animal to God. And so everything was spelled out. It has to go through the priesthood. Now over here today, we now have the church. And we have Jesus who is sitting in heaven. And we can't see him. But we can study about what makes a high priest function. And that's some of the things that he's going to be talking about there. So now over here, just like we had over there, if we want to go to God, we have to go through our high priest. We see that Paul teaches this, for there is one God and one mediator between God and men, himself man, Christ Jesus. Now, Christ came to become a man. Now then, he's the mediator. He stands between us and God. You don't just go to God. You don't just decide, okay, I'm going to go talk to God, or I'm going to offer a sacrifice to God. You don't just go do that. There is a mediator that is between God and man. Now, he himself was man. Now, that tonight is going to become a very important thing. We talked about it in an earlier chapter, but he's going to come back to it again. Do you remember this? We talked about why it was important for the high priest, for Jesus to be a high priest, why it was important for him to come down and become a man in order to be our high priest. Remember that? It was so he could feel every feeling we have. He could be tempted with every temptation we have. He could understand every problem we will face. So that as a high priest, and we go to him as a high priest, he will be able to say, I've been there. I've walked in those shoes. I understand your anxieties. I understand those things. And so he was man, and now then he's a high priest. Now in John, Jesus himself said, whatsoever you shall ask in my name, or that is by my authority, I'll do. If you ask anything in my name, that is by the authority of Jesus Christ. So when we go to God, we approach him by the authority of Jesus Christ. Now, one other thing before we get to this new verse here tonight is that in Hebrews chapter 2, that we talked about a minute ago, it said, wherefore it behooved him in all things, that is necessary for him to be made like unto his brethren, that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest. Now he would be merciful to whom? To us sinners. He would be faithful to whom? To God, making sure that everything is the way it's supposed to be. Verse 18, for in that he himself hath suffered, being tempted, he's able to help them that are tempted. So he's walked in our shoes. He's felt our pain. When we take our cares to him, he understands what we've been through here. So now then, we're down to tonight as we start in verse 14. It said, having then a great high priest who hath passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Why do I have those birds flying out there? That's the first heaven. Now he passed through the heavens, plural. In the Bible, it always talks about the heavens. And Paul says, paradise, Christ, God, they're in the third heaven. But now there's the first heaven. The first heaven is the atmosphere that we breathe, the air where the birds fly. That's your first heaven. And we know that from Genesis 1, that God created the heavens. He created the birds of the heavens. So we know that. Then number 2, as you go a little higher, you run out of the atmosphere, but you run into the stars. And you run into all of those various things that are out there. That's the second heaven that it's talking about. And then the third heaven is up where God himself is. So Jesus then, our great high priest, who came down to be a man, died on this cross. Now then, he has passed through the heavens, going back up to the right hand of God. So now, having then a great high priest who hath passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. Now, we've talked about that word confession before. It's a big thing. It's a big word. We spend a lot of time on it, and we don't want to ever forget it. You have a confession that if you are a Christian, that you've had to make. And that confession is, who is your Lord? See? Who is going to be your Lord? And when Peter made the confession, Jesus asked him, he said, who do you say I am? What did Peter say? Here we have the first time it's uttered. What did he say? Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Just that brief. That's who you are. Now stop to think, thou art the Christ. Now, Christ, what does that mean in our vocabulary today? What does the word Christ mean in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, in our vocabulary today? Anointed one, the anointed one. What does the word anointed mean? If I anoint Denise down here in just a minute, I may do that just to show you what it is if you don't know. How many of you don't know what anointed is? How many of you want me to anoint Denise? Okay, we got one hand, so I'll go do it. Take this water, and I'm going to pour it over the top of her head. That's anointing. How many of you want to see me do that? Now a whole lot of hands go up, Denise. We got there. That's anointing. It means, now they anointed, instead of water, they anointed with oil. So they poured oil on these people. Now they didn't do it to everybody. They only did it to 3 kinds of people, 3 offices. Sometimes they didn't do it to one, but always they did it to 2. Who did they always do this to? A king. If you were going to install a king, the way they did it was they anointed him. Who was the other guy? The priest, the high priest. He would be anointed. And then who's the other that they did it most of the time, but not all the time? You know? A prophet. That's right. And so then, he now is the Christ. He is the king. He is the high priest. That's what Peter's saying. That's who you are. You are the chosen one of God, the Son of God. And so then, we're told that we are to make that confession. And when we do that, what we're doing is saying, Jesus is our Lord. See, we're obeying him. So now hold fast that confession. Hold it fast. Don't let it get away. Let me ask you this. What does that mean? What does it mean? Hold fast your confession. Does it mean hold fast your words? Is that the idea? What would it mean? Stop to think. If you had to write a paper on it right now, what does it mean? Hold fast your confession. What would that mean? Well, let me put it another way. When an immigrant comes over and they study for 5 years and so forth, and they take the test to become a naturalized citizen, do they have to take an oath or a confession? Do they have to raise their right hand and they promise to renounce what? All other citizenship and be faithful to what? The citizenship here of America. That's our confession. I am an American. America is my government. I will live here faithfully. That's their confession. Now, if you told an immigrant, then, who's a naturalized citizen, now since you become a naturalized citizen, you hold fast your confession. What would that mean?
They can't go and fight for the previous country that they had citizenship for. They can't undermine our country for that country. And they have to go serve in military service if they're drafted or in their time.
Okay, now you're talking about they got to do something, right?
Right.
Yeah. In other words, if they hold fast, they have to be faithful to everything that the American government stands for. Isn't that right? And that's what it means. And if you hold fast your confession, what does it mean? You're going to live everything your master, Jesus Christ, tells you to do it. That's holding it fast. If you're tempted to go out in a sexual perversion or in a bank robbery or in telling a lie, what does it mean if you hold fast your confession? See? Tomorrow I'm tempted to tell a lie and make $1 million. Now, if I stop to think, Lowell, hold fast your confession. What do I need to think about? Jesus is my Lord. He's the Christ, the Son of the living God. I am obedient to Him. What does He tell me about lying and cheating and deceiving? And then I hold fast my confession. And so holding fast your confession means that you're living it out every day of your life. Now let's hold it fast. For we have not a high priest that cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities. Now there's two negatives there. So some of you English scholars tell me what that means when you have two negatives. It makes a positive when you have two negatives. Now, for we do not have a high priest. Well, we do have a high priest. But we do not have a certain kind of a high priest. What kind of a high priest do we not have? One that cannot be touched with our infirmities. We don't have a high priest that cannot be touched with our infirmities. Now let's put it in a positive way. We have a high priest who can be touched by our infirmities. See? And so when we go to our high priest, he is touched by our infirmities. He has felt it. He understands it. He's been here. He understands really what it is all about here. But we have one that hath been in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. So he's been through the whole thing. He's been through. He understands the pains that we're going through. He understands the temptations, whatever it is, that we're going through. He understands these things. See? Now, I guess it'd be like a father and a son. When the son gets to be a teenager and he looks at his dad, how does he look at his dad? Does he look at dad as a man who has been through it and understands all of his problems? No. Dad didn't even know how to work a computer. And here it is, I'm a computer junkie. Dad never had the problems that I have with a computer. Well, let me ask you, did Dad have those problems? Instead of Dad working with a computer in trying to balance his books, what did Dad use? Okay, Dad used a pen and a paper, didn't he? See? He sat down and he used this little thing. He might have used the old-fashioned, I don't even know what they call them now, calculator, mechanical type calculator. But Dad has had to go through all the mechanical, all the financial problems that boy has. Only that boy has it a little easier than Dad. It might have taken Dad all night to try to figure out one of those problems. Well, this boy just punches it in and figures it out. No, Dad does understand. Well, Dad didn't even have a car. So Dad didn't have all the sexual temptations that I have as a 16-year-old boy. Is that right? Well, if you don't have a car, you haven't had sexual temptations, have you? Oh, yeah. It's just been in a horse and buggy. See? It's been at another place, see, rather than there. Yeah, Dad understands, and that's Christ. Christ understands. Now, when you have a problem, who do you want to go to? Is it somebody that you feel will understand your problem, or somebody that has never felt it, they haven't been through it, and you go to them just to get some advice? Which one do you want? You want the one that's been there, haven't you? Guess who I call if I have a plumbing problem? Hey, Steve. Now, why will I call Steve? Because he's been there. He understands. I got a hole dug out here in my front yard. I'm digging down, and I can't find this, and I can't do that. What do I do? He's been there. He knows. He's sweated over the thing. He's done all of these things. I'm going to call him. See? Now, you're going to call someone to do that. When you lose a loved one, suppose you lose a child, there's no feeling like that in the whole world. It stands alone. It stands alone. And you go to somebody that hadn't lost a child, and they might say, I understand. Now I'm going to give you an actual example. I understand. I lost my little dog one time, and it broke my heart. That's an actual example. Now, how would that make you feel if you lost your child died, and you came to me and I said, I understand, I lost a dog one time, and it just broke my heart. I couldn't get over that thing for a year. See? You'd feel like slapping me, wouldn't you? See? It just, so far out, you see, in this. You want to go to somebody and you'll seek out somebody who has lost that child. Tell me about it. Can I ever heal? What will happen? And then you can talk to somebody who has that feeling. I can tell you another thing. People who have lost a loved one, a spouse or a child, they can tell just like the snap of a finger when they talk to you whether you've ever lost a child or a spouse. Just like that. Bing. That's how quick it is. Just the way you say, I'm sorry. Just the first sentence that comes out of your mouth, they'll be able to tell that. You say, how? You're not going to know till you've been there. But I'll tell you something. That is an example about Jesus Christ. We can go to him, and he understands. He understands our problems. That's the thing this is wanting us to get to. That's what the Hebrew writer is wanting us to see. Now, therefore, here, let us therefore draw near with boldness unto the throne of grace. So now let's go to the throne of grace. Let us go to that throne of where God and Christ is sitting. And it's a throne of grace. Why would it be called a throne of grace? What other kind of throne could you have? If you approach somebody, suppose you go to Saudi Arabia. They have guys sitting on a throne. And you walk in to approach that king. What kind of throne do you think you would be going into? If you don't know about Saudi Arabia, everybody knows about Saddam Hussein. He was king. He had a throne. When people came into his throne, what kind of throne were they coming into? What? A judgment, of condemnation. Take his own son-in-law. Remember his son-in-law rebelled and then ran off to another country, and so he sent word, please come back and I'll forgive you, everything will be forgiven, and we'll put you back in the system again. So his son-in-law comes back, his son-in-law walks into him, walks up to the king. What did the king do? Pulled out his pistol and shot him. That's a throne. Would you want to approach that kind of throne? If you were in Saudi Arabia How would you feel if you went to Saudi Arabia and you said, I want to tell somebody, I feel like I'm being persecuted, that I can't really take my Bible with me, and I can't study, and I can't talk to people about the Lord, and I'm going to go talk to the king. What do you think you'd find about the king? He'd say, that's the law. Throw that person in jail. No, it's not a throne of grace. A throne of grace is you will find favors you don't deserve. So you can go to that throne, go to God through Jesus Christ, and you can expect to find them to grant you favors that you don't deserve. They will be right every time. When you pray, they'll answer your prayer every time in the right way. Now, does that always mean that they'll give you what you ask for? Have you ever asked for anything and then later on, maybe in a week or 2 or 6 months, found out if you had have gotten it, what a mess you would have been in? I think all of us have done this. You go to him and you ask him for what you want and what you need. They'll listen. They have empathy. They have feelings that can be touched. That's what it's saying, see? Then they'll answer your prayer according to their will. They'll answer your prayer according to what is the best for you. See? What is the best for you? Isn't that a beautiful thought? So let us go with boldness. Go and, Lord, and constantly. How are we supposed to pray? What does he want us to do in our prayer life? How often does he want us to pray? What does he say? Pray without ceasing. Live a life of prayer. Always have him in your mind. Always ask him. It doesn't have to be a 5-minute prayer. Can you have a 10-second prayer? Or a 3-second prayer? Yeah. Pray without ceasing. So he's telling us what kind of a high priest then we actually have. Then he comes and he says, for every high priest being taken from among men. Now here's where we're going to get the comparison. God took the high priest from among men, brought him out here and took him in that particular way from there. Then we have Jesus came down, and he came from among men. He lived here for 30 years. He died the most horrible death that you could possibly die. He became our high priest, and now we can go to him. So God took Christ as a high priest from among men. Christ came, as far as I know the Bible teaches, for 2 reasons. Number 1, to die on that cross to shed his blood for our forgiveness. And then so he could function as our high priest, giving us the assurance he understands the pain and so forth that we've been through. So now, when God chose a high priest, whether in the old covenant or in the new, he took that high priest from among men. He didn't call an angel in and say, Gabriel, would you function as a high priest? But he took the high priest here from among men. Now he said, here's the reason he brought them from among men, bringing Jesus. For every high priest being taken from among men is appointed for men in things pertaining to God, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins. So now, he now has appointed this, and he's appointed a high priest in things pertaining to God. Now, I want you to keep that in mind, because in a minute we're going to see another point in here. But now, the high priest is to function in some way in things pertaining to God. Well, what are these things pertaining to God? That he may both offer gifts and sacrifices for sin. Our high priest is the one that can offer these gifts and sacrifices for sins. Let's make a distinction between the two. A gift, a sacrifice would be a blood gift. A gift would be a non-blood gift. Now, if I ask you for a blood gift, who could give me a blood gift, a blood sacrifice? What did they offer under the Old Covenant? Bulls, goats, turtle doves, offered animals for that. What kind of a non-blood gift did they offer? Could you give me one? Steve? What's that? Grain. First fruits of the field. Incense. So they offered these non-blood gifts. So whatever you're offering to God, now you offer them here through this high priest, that he may both offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. Now it's going to become a very important thing. Before we put anything else up here, what is the definition of a priest? Just a priest. What's the definition of a priest? He is someone who can offer sacrifices acceptable to God, that God will accept. Now, if you brought those sacrifices to me and said, here, Lowell, I want to offer these sacrifices to God, I would have to have the ability to know, will God even accept these sacrifices? Because God will only accept certain sacrifices. If somebody went to the high priest under the Old Covenant and wanted to offer a great sacrifice to God and said, I want to offer 1,000 animals on the altar today to God. What kind of a, when he told the kind of animal, what kind of animal could he mention? And the priest would say, no, it cannot be offered. All right, a pig would be the first one. Well, what about your horse, if you had a good horse? No, can't offer the horse either, see. A rabbit? No, can't offer a rabbit. To be a priest, you're going to have to make some decisions. You're going to have to know what can be offered. And so here it is. Now he's faithful in things pertaining to God, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices. And so that's what the high priest was about over there and what he's about over here. So now, the high priest offered the sacrifices to God that God would accept. And the same thing is true over here. In our sacrifices, we go through Christ. He offers the gifts that God will accept. Then it said, for every priest being taken from among men is appointed for men things pertaining to God. He may offer gifts and sacrifices for sin, who can bear gently with the ignorant and erring, for that he himself also is compassed with infirmity. Now, a minute ago, it was important for the high priest to be faithful to God, to offer the right kind of sacrifices. But now here, on the other hand, it's now important for him to bear gently with the ignorant and erring, for those two people. And he can do it if he's a man, because he's compassed with their infirmities. If you've lived in the body of a man, you know the problems of man. And so you've encompassed with their infirmities here then. So now, the high priest in the Old Covenant was taken from among men. High priest in the New Covenant is taken from among men here in this way. So it's necessary for him to come for that purpose. Now then, let's define that word, bear gently, or as some of your translations say, compassion, that he can have compassion on you. It's kind of an interesting word. It's only used a couple of times in the New Testament. And it's a word that is the means, and that means the average, the in-between. It is the means between driven by passion or emotion, such as anger, and a stoical apathy toward the event. So now let's look at these two things. Here you could have two men, and you take your feelings toward those men, and one of them, to find a solution, he just may be angry as he can be, and he may get mad, and he said, here's my solution, and he's just burning with passion. You think he'll make a good decision under that situation? Or let's suppose you take your sad story to this individual, and this individual is a person that he feels your feelings. That's all he can do. He just breaks down and he cries and he feels the same way that you feel under this. Will he be able to make a good decision? No. Well, what about the guy over here that's not bothered at all? The stoic. You come to me and you say, Lowell, here's my problem. Well, go ahead and spill it out. It won't hurt me at all. Well, my child died today. Okay, what do you want? Well, I want some comfort. Well, all right. Don't you know these verses over here? You can go and you can read these. That's stoic. Nobody bothers me. You don't touch my emotions with your feelings. Would I make a good judge? Would I make a good high priest? No. Who do you want? Do you want the man that every time that you have a problem, that he breaks down and cries or gets furious and angry? Or do you want the guy over here who's a stoic and has no feelings? Which one do you want? Don't want either one. I want that guy that's in the middle, see. I want that guy who, when I take my problems to you, he feels it. He hurts. He hurts. But he doesn't become part of the problem. He's able to stand back and rather to be caught up into the emotion of the moment, he's able to make a proper decision. That's what this word really means. Thayer says this about it. He says it's moderation in passions or emotions, especially anger and grief, to be affected moderately or in due measure. Hence, of one who is not unduly disturbed by the errors, faults, sins of others, but bears with them gently. Let me ask you what you would do. If you had got caught up in a sexual sin, you committed fornication, and you decided, I need to go talk to one of the elders about this. And you know that if you come and you talk with me, my reaction is going to be, what in the world did you do that for? Why in the world? Here it is, don't you know better than that? Now, I'm right in everything I say. Should you commit fornication? You know better. You shouldn't have done it. You're just weak. Would you want to come to me, or would you want to come to somebody like Steve that says, oh my, oh, this is terrible. This is something that's really bad. Let's talk about it. He doesn't let you off the hook. He doesn't say it's okay for what you've done. He lets you know it's wrong. He shows you the consequences. And he said, now here's what we could do. Which one of us do you want to come to? See? That's what this is talking about. Somebody that's not caught up in the emotional trauma of this situation. So that's what the Lord, he feels it, but he will stay calm and he will do what is right. Now look at what the high priest had to do in the Old Covenant. The high priest, or in fact any priest, had to decide whether a sacrifice for a sin might be legally offered. Did it qualify as a high-handed sin or a sin of weakness or ignorance? Now there's some passages in there. We'll not take time to go back and look at them, but this shows you there. You say, what's the difference? What do I mean by a high-handed sin? Or, as some translations say, a witting sin. It means a sin that you know is wrong, you've calculated it, and you've decided you're going to do it anyway. Now, if you're guilty of that kind of sin, God in the law of Moses said, kill that person. Eradicate him from society. He's useless. And it was death for that kind of person. On the other hand, the other person who was ignorant, sinned, not knowing it was a sin, or they got caught up in the moment, let their lust get away from them in some way. You see the erring, ignorant and erring? And the erring, and so you conclude this was a sin of where it may look like it was a high-handed open rebellion, but it was a momentary thing. You have to make that decision. That's what the priest had to do. Let me give you a couple examples. You're the priest now. I want to ask you what you would do. Had you been there at Mount Sinai when Aaron made that golden calf, what would you have done? Would you have killed him or would you forgive him? Was that a sin of ignorance? Did Aaron know you shouldn't make a golden calf? Why, of course he did. Was that a sin was that a sin against the commandment of God, what God would want? Yeah. Was that a high-handed sin, or was that a sin of passion, a sin of being caught up in the moment? Well, it sure looks like it's that high-handed stuff, doesn't it? I mean, you go look at it, and Aaron says, what did he tell the people? When they said, make us a god, what did Aaron say? No way, no, no. Then what did people say? Make us a god. No, make us a god. Finally, what did Aaron say? Well, bring me all your gold and see what I can do. Put it in there, and he said, out came this God. Did Aaron know what he was talking about? Did he know what he was doing? Or was he caught up? If you're the judge now you have to be the judge, because this is a problem. This is where Jesus Christ has to make this decision. When you go to him and you've committed a sin like that, which is a horrible, wretched, terrible, ungodly sin, nothing good I can think about it, what kind of high priest do you want? What did God do on that occasion before they appointed the high priest? What did God do? Did he kill Aaron or did he forgive him? He punished him and he forgave him. Okay? Let's take David. Now here's a guy that's out walking on the rooftop and he looks over and sees this beautiful woman. He finally calls her over. They commit fornication. He finds out that she's with child. He doesn't stop there. He said, well, we can solve that. So he calls for her husband to come home from war. Brings the husband home. Husband comes into David's there. He said, he'd sent off and he said, have this guy to bring me a report of how the battle is going. The guy came, walked into David and said, here's how the battle is going. David said, thanks a million. You go on home. Your wife lives right over there. You go on home, spend the night with her, and then you can go on back. He was going to blame that child on the husband. This husband said, no, I will not go. Now, he's just right over there. David could see her, see? I'll not go because my buddies are back there fighting a war, and until we win that and come home, I'll not go enjoy my wife. Well, then what did David do? Now, this guy's a real man. Then what did David do? Got him drunk. Got him drunk and then tried to get him over. And even in a drunken stupor, he wouldn't go over. So David said, okay, take this letter, and he sent it back to him. And what did the letter say? Go give it to your captain, and told the captain, make sure you put Uriah up on the front row. I want you to go up and attack the wall. This is where they'd be rolling stones down. And I want you to attack the wall, and then I want everybody except Uriah, don't tell him, I want all the soldiers to pull back and let him catch the stones. And it worked, and he was killed. Now that's pretty bad stuff. Was that ignorant sin? No way. David knew he shouldn't have been doing any of that stuff. It wasn't ignorant. Was that a sin of open rebellion or caught up in passion of the moment? Which one was it? Did David say, I know God doesn't want me to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway? Or did he got caught up in a moment, he looked over his sexual lust, and then he's in trouble, and now I have the authority to do this, and so he starts working it out, and which one was it? Well, it's real easy for you and me to know. It was sin of passion. God didn't put him to death. Didn't have him put to death. Now that takes a lot of wisdom. That takes a lot of wisdom for the high priest to be able to look in your heart. And as you go to him after you've done the most wretched, horrible, wicked things like David, whereas if you would come to me and the decision was given, I might kill you. But the high priest will be able to look in your heart and understand you were caught up in the passion of the moment and you can be forgiven. Don't ever underestimate the value of the high priest that we have in heaven. Every day of our life we have this. Then it says, and by reason thereof is bound, as for the people, so for himself, to offer sins for sins here. Now, Leviticus 16 shows the high priest had to go in, offer sacrifices for himself, come back out, get the sacrifices, offer them for the people, because he was a sinner. So when he went in, offered sacrifices for himself, he came out, now he's sinless. So what kind of a high priest is it that we're to have that's able to offer sacrifices to God? A sinless sacrifice. Now what about Jesus over here? What about him? Did he offer any sacrifices for his sins? He never committed a sin. He never committed a sin. Totally sinless. So we have the high priest over here offering sacrifices for his sin. Jesus is totally sinless as he goes to God. And no man taketh this honor unto himself, but when he is called of God, even as was Aaron. So here's some passages that shows that God called Aaron. Number 16, when Korah tried to take it away from Aaron, we see what God did. And so God called Aaron. And the same thing is with Christ. So Christ also glorified not himself to be made a high priest. Jesus didn't come and say, I'm going to be the high priest. But he that spake unto him, that's God, thou art my son. Now we're in Psalms 110. This day have I begotten thee, as he saith in another place, thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So God chose not only Aaron in the old covenant, but God chose Jesus in the new covenant, and neither man usurped that authority. Who in the days of his flesh, having offered up prayers and supplication, the difference there, a prayer is any communication with God. A supplication is something made with passion, where you're in trouble and you just beg, oh Lord, please, Lord, and you're supplicating in that way. So now he's offered up with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and having been heard for his godly fear. Now when Jesus went out the garden that night, he said, I'm sorrowful unto death. Then he got down and he prayed to God for 3 hours. Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Now, was it possible? Later on, Jesus said, I could call 12 legions of angels and God would send them right now. But had he done it, what is it that Jesus could not have done? He could not have been a Savior. Had he not died, he couldn't have been the Savior of mankind. And though he was a son, yet learned obedience. I intended to spend a little time on this tonight, but my time right here is just really rapidly running out. He learned obedience, but I want to point this out. When a child, when you were, I'll pick on Steve again. Back in his hometown, I found out he was just one of these little jewels of a kid. He didn't do anything bad. All the family loved him, and all you hear is just how wonderful Steve was, how he obeyed in here. So now, you might say, was Steve an obedient child? Did he know what obedience was when he left home? How many of you would say yes? Raise your hand. I'm telling you the kind of guy that he was. How many of you say no? How many of you are cowards and afraid to vote? The vast majority of you, see, are afraid to vote. Okay, let me tell you something, and then I'm going to let Steve be the judge. Steve was that perfect kid. When he became 18, his family was so proud of him. He obeyed his parents. He was that perfect kid. But he didn't know what obedience was. And what I'm going to tell you is this. Not until he went in the service and went through basic training, there he learned obedience. There he learned whatever you're asked to do, you don't even question it. If you're asked to go into the face of a machine gun, what do, Steve? You go. Until you have learned that, you don't know obedience. Right? A little kid, a year old, knows obedience, getting their hand slapped, I can't touch this, but they don't know obedience. A 16-year-old boy, he knows he can't do certain things, but he doesn't know obedience. And about the best thing I can know is, and I wish everybody had to go through that boot camp, is you come out of there and you don't even think for yourself. When the man in charge of you says go, if there's a machine gun out there, you go. That's obedience. Whatever it is that Christ says, you do it. Have I exaggerated it, or is that right? Is that when you learned obedience, you see, in going in there? So that obedience, it's a big thing. Then he, now having been made perfect, we've talked about that, he became complete as our Savior. He became unto all them that obey him the author of eternal salvation. Now I just want to call this to our attention. Up to this point, what is the word that was used? He'd save you by what? Faith. Now who is it he's going to save? Unto all them that obey him. We're going to come back and we're going to see in this book how faith and obedience are tied together. So then, we close with this. He said he's named of God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Aaron had a priesthood in the Old Testament. Christ is after the order of Melchizedek. There's where we pick up our story next week. Class.